Hi, we're back, and we're going to talk with you a little bit more about the Lord's Prayer. And we're going to go into a little more where it says, Our Father who art in heaven. We talked about the comfort that comes from that we start off knowing that we belong to a Father in heaven. But then it says, Hallowed be thy name. And hallowed is kind of a weird word. You know, you probably don't use that every day. And the place where we probably come closest to using the hallowed is Halloween. You know, I mean, that sounds like it, you know, and Halloween literally means a holy evening. Halloween, holy evening. And the origins of Halloween go back in church history and other history to a night when people remembered Christian martyrs who had given their lives for their testimony of faith in Jesus Christ, and it was a holy evening of remembering those who had died for their faith, and that eventually morphed into pumpkins and all this,
witches and
all the craziness. But it has that history. So holiness means you mark something out, and you respect it. You give it honor.
Right. And
so we're going to think about this now. The idea of God's holiness is just core, especially to the Old Testament. You know, all through the Old Testament, God would make sure that people respected and feared God.
Yes.
I mean, in the Christian faith, Jesus comes near to us and He's our friend. But all through the Old Testament, God wanted to reinforce the point that God is majestic and awesome and mighty, and you don't just trifle with God.
No.
You need to
Very
be
true.
Respectful. And so there's a case in the Old Testament where some people went into God's presence carelessly, and it says fire came out of the holy place and consumed them.
Exactly.
So it becomes very much an issue that we learn to come into God's presence with a sense of humility and respect for the greatness, the purity, and the glory of God. It's a very rich concept because it has to do with who God is, and J.I. Packer, I'm sure, does a whole section on the holiness of God. That God is pure, and God is almighty, and God is powerful, and to be respected and honored. And hallowed be thy name. It says, God, we want you to be known as the majestic and the mighty one. And God does that a bit through the way God relates to us too, God's glory. Joe has a reading about how the glory of God is attached to how God works in our lives too.
And it brings forth the word as it prayers for glory. And this is John 14:13. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Son may bring glory to the Father. And that's exactly what Jesus was doing. He's bringing glory to the Father for Him and us. And in talking about the glory clause, it is not burdensome condition of our prayers. Once we've been adopted into God's family, He is glorified by His provisions for even our very basic needs. Why? Because He links His glory on earth to our welfare. Exodus 4:31, Deuteronomy 4:35, and Psalm 79:9. We should, in fact, seek to tie every prayer request to some aspect of His glory, and always pray with a view towards honoring Him.
Yeah. You know, it's that through us, the glory of God is seen. That through our lives, people come to know how great and wonderful God is. And part of that is when we tell the stories of how God has provided for us. You know, as God meets our needs and cares for us, we can give glory to God by saying, I prayed or I sought God, and God answered this prayer for me. So Jesus starts off this prayer, our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And so through all that happens to us, our prayer is that God would be respected, honored, feared, and revered as the great and awesome God that God truly is. You know, I don't know that we catch that so much. You know, I think you have to have experiences in your life. I don't know if you've ever been to places like waterfalls or the Grand Canyon or seen majestic sunrises. You have to have an experience somewhere of awe.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the power of things.
Of where, you know, looking at the universe and seeing how large and big and majestic God is, and not to think in human terms as far as being condensed, enclosed, is that an object is there and God is a physical being like we are. No. God is so immense it's beyond the figure of imagination to say that His time is not our time. Our minutes, our hours, our years are nowhere near what God looks at. So knowing it, fully understanding that the Father looks over us at any given time in the past, in the future, and now as to where we are in ourselves. And Pastor Phil brings out very, very acknowledging the fact of these wondrous sights that are right on earth. But could we fully imagine what heaven on earth will look like? And that's what God keeps pushing towards us. Heaven on earth. Follow in my path. And Jesus laid this all before us.
Yeah, and God is glorified when the presence of God's kingdom begins to change things. You know, Jesus came and He said, Father, I've glorified you through what I've done. So when people were healed, when people were fed, when He raised Lazarus from the grave, all of that brought glory to God because it pointed to God and God's greatness and God's power. You know, I wish we could just give you somehow a way to appreciate the immensity and the majesty of God. But it's something you have to take time to cultivate a bit. And when you do that, then it puts everything else in perspective, because your own stuff begins to look much smaller. You know, our own stuff begins. So as we go to prayer, we've got all these things on our mind that are important to us and we want to see happening. And then all of a sudden we've dwelled on the Father in heaven, and our goal is to make God's glory known and hallowed. All of a sudden it puts everything in perspective.
Oh, it does. I mean, it's. I'm an immensely different person today, and I hope you can believe that. The more that I read and wanted to seek God, the more I felt with God. My days, my minutes, my hours, I look forward to reading, to knowing and understanding what Jesus did for us. And forgiving those sins that we had attached to us, that He broke that. And He said, it is finished. Now we have all these wonderful ways of learning about God. I mean, Pastor Phil teaching and bringing forth the things that we yearn to hear, we yearn to listen to. And if you take that time to read about it, to understand it, it then becomes you. It becomes part of you. And it never ends. It never ends. It only seeks more and more of the information.
Right, and the scriptures say that God rewards people who seek Him. So there it is. So God rewards people who seek Him. And as we go to the Lord's Prayer, we just seek to be in the presence of God, to honor the greatness, the glory, the mercy and justice of God. And so when you pray the Lord's Prayer, then, you know, we're so hoping you're starting to see, when you just go, you don't go, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Like, you know, you think, what am I praying? What does this mean when I say this? And you might try to write it in your own words. You know, sometimes we do this, you know, like the one who provides for me, I celebrate or I praise your greatness. You know, that's another way to say it,
Yeah.
but it's all there. And so the holiness of God, just a brief look at it, but Jesus was thought this was central to life.
Yes.
And so we'll have some questions for you to talk about that are written on the webpage there.